I was honored to be selected, and I was the only female to be selected and actually was on the teams. But I deployed, I was the first one boots on the ground in 2005. So Alpha and Bravo team went over to Afghanistan, and it was very interesting because we didn't really know what we were doing. It was a brand new program. We didn't know actually what we were facing. When we got into Afghanistan, it was like a different world. But overall, very honored to be able to serve, very honored that DEA placed agents in that field, and it was just great memories, and if I had to do it all over again, I would. So I started in 2005, did 4 tours. I left fast approximately 08, and then was relocated to Lima, Peru. Nothing really actually prepares you until you get there and start figuring things out. But the older generation of agents, the old snowcappers, I'd always heard the stories about Colombia travels, Bolivia, Guadalajara, all that region stuff, and I always wanted to do something like that. So when this program came up, I'm like, I want to raise my hand, because I had heard about the fabulous experiences with SNOWCAP. All these older agents had all these fabulous stories, and they were very proud, and they were very proud of DEA. And I thought, you know, I want to be part of that family. And so when the announcement came out and I raised my hand, but you know, going over, you're not quite prepared until you actually get into the mix and you go, wow, there's so much I still need to learn. Yeah, my teammates, they were very encouraging. And they protected me, and they wanted to protect me, but they knew they had to give me, you know, certain leeway to make mistakes and stuff, to normalize, to make things normal. But I couldn't ask for a better set of guys. With the, you know, the group supervisors were always very supportive of me. There was different times when you go out with DOD and you have some ODA personnel. They kind of look at you like, okay, why is she here? Or when I'm walking across the embassy grounds and all of a sudden the guys are going, who's that and where she came from? When I went out into the field, I purposely never covered up. I always dressed like the guys did. I purposely drove all over town in order to show that females are just as important. So the Afghanis, they would kind of look at me. Now, the NIU units, the ones that we're training, they would talk to me, they kid, they joke with me, and I finally asked them, I said, why are you accepting me as a female? They said, because you're a teacher. And I'm like, explain it to me. They said, well, you got the guy teachers, you got the female teachers, and then you got the rest of everyone else. But because you're a female, because you're American, we respect you. And when we went on operations, I mean, a lot of times when we first started operations, everything was, like I said, brand new, wasn't as unified as the later on teams. We were out there and we all spread out. And here I'd be bopping down, you know, up and down the hills, and then some of my Afghani partners will look over and they see the short girl and they, oh, Stacy. They come running and they come in and they would escort me around to make sure that I was safe. They actually started respecting me in that terms and protecting me. So it was a great experience. There was some hiccups. There were some obstacles at times I had to overcome, like sleeping arrangements. Whenever I would, we'd travel to, we'd leave Afghanistan, have to go to another base. I'd be stuck in left field, and I'm like, no. So the guys would smuggle me in, and I don't know if I can put this on camera, but anyway, they would smuggle me in, put me in the back bunk. There was an episode where it was in the middle of the night, we got in, and they said, Stacey, low profile, top bunk, low profile. Well, in the middle of the night, another unit came in, door open, they had their little flashlights on, they're trying to come in, it was another unit. I popped my head up, just instinctively. They took one, looked at me, and everyone reversed and went out. So we had the whole tent to ourselves. We were there trying to build international conspiracy cases in a war zone. We had to develop new sources. We had to determine, you know, who's friend or who's foe. We had to deal with different agencies, 3-letter alphabet soup, that maybe didn't care for us being there. So we had to build relationships with them. We had to build relationships with DOD. They had the boots on the ground. At first, they didn't want DEA there. Now, big DOD, yes. Little DOD in theater, absolutely not, because they thought that we were going to disrupt the harmony that they were building with the Afghans. And so when we come in, they thought, okay, they're gonna disrupt and tear down our relationships, and they're gonna have to rebuild them again. No, that was not the case. We went in to go after to destroy the heroin labs, to gather up evidence, to build the cases and take it back to stateside. So once we continued going out with them, then we developed the relationships, respect. And then we built relationships with the Brits. Back then, the Brits was our main foreign liaison, and they were wonderful. I mean, they picked up the ball. They welcomed us with family. They looked at me and said, "Come on, chica," boom. It was good. The juice was worth the squeeze. Absolutely, it was worth it. And the reason being because we did seize a lot of drugs. We did build investigations, but we also trained the Afghanis. We gave them hope for the future. We showed them how to stand on their own 2 feet and go after the warlords. So definitely, it was worth. DEA needs to continue doing programs like this, and because this is what puts DEA on the map. DEA has always been in the foreign arena known as cowboys. It's not that we're rogue or anything like that, but we go out there, we take care of business. We do the job. The mission is always first. And that's the one thing I'm very proud of my brothers at DEA, is that we get out there and we kick butt. My greatest moment was building relationships with the females that were female Afghanis that were building a new life. There were some gals that we were training, and they were actually Christians, but they had to keep that as a secret. So I would take them aside, and I would actually, go over things more specifically. I'd work with them a little bit harder, because I know that, you can throw something at them and they get it, but no, I say, this is why we're doing this. And you're gonna have to be extra strong, and you're gonna have to show extra bravado, because you will not be respected like the other Afghanis, the males. And when I went through that door, sometimes we go through compounds and stuff, I'd make sure I had a female with me just to give her the encouragement that she can do this just as well as a man could. So my fourth and final tour, I actually went to Afghanistan pregnant, and I didn't know it. And so when I got there, in the very early part of my tour, I found out that I was pregnant. My husband was beside himself and I said, no, I'm gonna stay in this tour. I was based by myself in Kandahar for a period of time at the ODA camp. There was another agent that ended up coming down and assisting me. But going through a pregnancy in Afghanistan is no fun. You're breathing in the pollution. I was still going out there on operations. I had 2 attempts in my life during that tour, and after a while, I started having a little bit of complications. And so I was able to complete 3 months out of the 4th, and I went home with tears, because I thought, oh my gosh, even though this is my 4th and final tour, I didn't complete that last month of the tour, that I let the females down, that this is going to be held against me of, okay, so this is why we can't have females on the team. So that was, and it sometimes it's still hard for me to factor through. DEA cares about the community. It doesn't matter where that community is. It doesn't matter if it's in the sandbox, doesn't matter if it's in the jungles, doesn't matter if it's in New York City. DEA agents care, and they care about families and what these drugs does to family.
In 2006, I was working in Los Angeles, and we received notice that they were going to have a selection process for interested members in FAST. You had to apply for it. I didn't really know what would be involved. The information was just it was going to be physical, and they advised us to be in good shape when we showed up. And so I made the application, I sent the information, and they accepted me into the selection process. So I received orders, they cut orders, and I went to New Mexico for the very first FAST selection. The actual selection process to enter was difficult. You know, at that time I was older. I was in my early 30s. I had been in the military prior, but as you get older, you don't heal as quickly, your joints aren't as forgiving. So entering the pipeline for selection was difficult. The first week was the worst part. We did a lot of rock marches, a lot of timed runs. We did some swimming, but every day was very full. And it was led by the U.S. military. So it was like stepping back into the military, but through the DEA lens. And it was quite difficult. I lost, I think, 9 of my 10 toenails during that first week from the forced rock marches. So, yeah. After the 8-week selection process in New Mexico, I applied for a position and I was accepted to a team. And I received notice that I had received my orders to report to Quantico. And I was nervous, I was going to be leaving right away for my first deployment to Afghanistan, and I hadn't even PCS'd yet. So I was showing up fresh and then getting on an airplane with my gear to go. We did about I think a 3-week workup where they sent me TDY from Los Angeles so I could be with the team prior to actually deploying. We also did that in New Mexico, and then we left. January of 2008 was my first deployment to Afghanistan, and arriving in country, it was eyes wide open for me. Very different culture. Everything was just new to me. And back working with the military, it was phenomenal. Everybody I worked with, from the military to my fellow FAST team members, were just incredible. I tell people oftentimes I never worked so hard to be average, because everyone around me was such a high performer, and I didn't want to disappoint them, I didn't want to disappoint myself, and so I just worked very hard to do the best job I could. Our deployments in Afghanistan were 4 months in length. So I did 4 months there and then rotated out, and then I did a total of 4 of those deployments. And what was interesting about the first deployment was that I arrived in wintertime. And so what you realize in Afghanistan is that the seasons matter, because the enemy, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, they have what's called a fighting season. It's not that they don't fight in the wintertime, but the conditions are oftentimes not advantageous for fighting in snow and things of that nature. So they would sometimes retreat, and not that they weren't conducting their activities, but they weren't coming out to fight as much as they do in the spring and summer and fall. And so that was interesting to me. I hadn't considered that. But we had a good first tour. We had a lot of good activity, hit a lot of heroin labs. We assisted the military in helping find some targets they were looking for, because we had a good human intelligence network. So it was a very good first deployment. Well, obviously the pre-deployment workups were very fruitful for us in country, because, for example, you wear night vision goggles, and to wear night vision goggles you have to become comfortable with things like a loss of depth perception, for example. So you have to get used to walking under night vision goggles. We call them NODs, night optical devices, or NVGs. So training with night vision goggles, night optical devices, you have to become comfortable with that, and you have to do it night after night. You can't just wear them for like 30 minutes and I'm good. You have to walk, imagine this, you're walking not just with night vision goggles, limited light, but you're also in terrain. So you're in mountainous terrain, like sometimes the footing was not so good, and so our preparation prior to deploying was good. So when I arrived in country, I felt fairly confident in my abilities to at least operate in that capacity. But now you're facing, an opponent as you're entering their territory that's going to resist you with sometimes force. It was multi-pronged. Obviously, we were part of the drug flow attack strategy, so our goal was to take intelligence and attack known targets in their heroin labs, for example, or the money pipeline through their money networks in country. So we would further investigations where we would be fed intelligence, but at the same time we're gathering intelligence on the missions and in between missions to assist a larger investigation, maybe that was originated here in the States, information from maybe SOD or maybe information from the military that would help the further, like the overall effort in Afghanistan. I think probably my greatest accomplishment is surviving the tours, and a lot of that isn't necessarily skill. Fortune falls on everyone at different times, and so does misfortune. And there were multiple instances I had where things went bad quickly, and people around me, for example, were shot. In 2010, I was involved in a firefight where I received shrapnel wounds to my head from an RPG blast. And it wasn't that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's just that's where the RPG impacted near me. And so I survived the blast, but people in similar circumstances, just by circumstances, may not have survived. And so I witnessed men on operations who were shot and didn't live, and it really tears you apart. You're watching a fellow American, a fellow friend, perish in front of you, and that's someone's, husband, or that's someone's son who's a patriot dying in front of you for a greater cause. And then you get back for a time to reflect, and that's when it really hits you. I would say my greatest low point was each tour. I didn't realize it at first, but on my first deployment, I went through this 2-week period that I couldn't explain. I didn't really want to talk to people. I wasn't my normal, jovial self. And after about my third tour, we had a psychologist tell me, he thought honestly that each time that I went over and I was explaining, I was having these 2-week periods where I needed to adjust. I thought maybe it was the time zone, and he thought honestly I was grieving my own death, and that I had to get past that in order to function. And it made sense, because it was usually around a 2-week mark where I felt like I was back, I could work without any missing home, like those things were on your mind, missing your family, your wife, your kids, and it was time to go to work. So I felt like more I was in a rhythm at that point, but his words of "you're grieving your own death" resounded with me. I think there was some truth to it. I was not in country. I was actually on a deployment with our team on a U.S. Navy warship, the USS Wasp. We had just flown a mission. We were in the Caribbean, operating in the Caribbean, attacking Marine and air tracks coming into the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And my boss at the time, Rich Dobrik, woke all of us up. It was around, it was after midnight, I believe. The lights in the passageways on the ships are red, so when I came out of the passageway, it was dark, red, and I was half asleep. I'd just gone to sleep, and Rich notified us that there had been a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. He didn't have many details, but he knew that there was loss of life. And he was going to be keeping us updated, but at that point we didn't know a whole lot. And it was a somber moment. And they flew us off of the ship the next day to come back to Virginia to attend, to receive the parties at Dover. And then they flew us back to the ship to finish our mission down there in the Caribbean.
You kept going.
We kept going. The one thing I would want the American public to know and to remember is that there are extraordinary Americans out there doing great work for them to keep them safe every day, even while they're sleeping, while they're not even considering it, around the world. And it's not just DEA, but while I was in DEA FAST, we were conducting operations all over the world in the furtherance of keeping the American public safe.
Vacancy came out about 2008, looking for to plus up the office, to go from, I believe, 6 people to 60. And I always wanted to be in the military and just never joined. So I thought, let's try, let's see how this works. So in 2008, I was selected and went through training about 3 weeks in Wyoming, doing some basic military training and some additional classes, Quantico. And I arrived there in July of 2009. I was there until August of 2011. It was very different. You land, when you land in Afghanistan, you realize this is a different world, almost biblical times. And just the drive from the airport to our compound. We had moved away from the embassy and had our own compound. Was you could feel tension, right? Everything was covered in a fine dust, almost bleak, right? But people were everywhere. And it was an interesting arrival. You know, an agent said, "Welcome to Afghanistan," right? And we went to a compound that had not quite been finished yet. Found out I had a roommate, someone that I had never met before. We were going to be sharing a room for about 4 months, and very different from the United States. In you wake up, you walk out your front door, you see your office, and you see where you eat, and that's going to be your life for the next 2 years. Is very self-contained. Now, part of volunteering to go there in 2008, someone had told me, go there before the rules get put in place. And at that time, you could drive around Kabul. You could go out and eat at restaurants. It was not encouraged, but give DEA agents a little bit of time, and boredom sets in, and they find ways to make the best of a situation. So it wasn't until meeting Afghans that you realized there's a solid group of, a vast majority of Afghans just wanted help. They felt helpless in their own country, and a lot of them were willing to fight to have something better. Our mission was specific to targeting some of the largest traffickers. There was a list of names that people had come up with, lots of reporting on these individuals, but they operated with impunity in the country. So working with our Special Operations Division, specifically the Bilateral Investigative Unit, it was what evidence could we have that could be used in a United States court to prosecute these individuals. We had a wire room, so it was writing wiretaps. It was making sure to document what sources were saying, making sure to keep sources and cultivate new ones so that they could be utilized in the United States in court. And then there was a separate component to that was support the U.S. military. So prior to a large military offensive in Marja, specifically, I was tasked to go through the wire room and find intercepted calls, specifically in Marja. And those calls were not necessarily drug related, but individuals bringing in bombs, bringing in guns, and arming the Taliban to fight because they knew big military was coming in, and providing that information to the military so they could solve some of those problems of the supply lines going into Marja. In addition, there were periods of time when it was kind of fun. Get on a helicopter, fly out to somewhere, see drugs, blow it up, but those drugs belong to someone. So take evidence, how can that be used in court? And very similar to what you do in the United States, it just happened to be in a war zone. I wrote with a group of other individuals a CPOT designation. And up until that point, there had never been a CPOT in Afghanistan. And in a country that produces 90% of the world's opium, it was a bit mind-boggling. And so we were able to write and present a CPOT proposal to the OCDEF committee, in which Azizullah al-Azai was designated as a CPOT within DEA. There were missions where you scratched your head wondering, how did I end up here? Where you were blowing up 8 tons of opium. We did an operation about 10 miles away from the Iranian border and about 50 miles north of the Pakistani border, in what can only be described as the middle of nowhere. And I grew up in Kansas. What am I doing here? There were a lot of moments like that. "100%, and there may be people that doubt the mission. However, sending the message that DEA will go where the drug traffickers are, that we operate around the world, and that our investigations and the way we go about investigating targets knows no bounds. There are some very large drug traffickers from Afghanistan that are currently in the United States. DEA's mission was also to target weapons traffickers. And some of those individuals are sitting in the United States courtroom because of DEA's efforts. Building that relationship with the Afghans as well, let the Afghans know the United States cares, the DEA cares. And I think all of those show to the world the capabilities of the DEA and the lengths that the DEA will go to capture criminals. If I had to describe to the American public DEA's capabilities in Afghanistan or around the world, is we are adaptable. And when a problem arises, no matter that problem, we can address it, and we can address it quickly. And that we are there without asking questions. When a program comes about, DEA steps up. And there are more than enough people that say, send me. And that the DEA does not rest until the job is done. And even though we are not currently in Afghanistan, individuals in Afghanistan are still being targeted by the DEA. And if the drug problem remains a worldwide problem, you will find a DEA agent and an intelligence analyst and a diversion investigator and the support structure to target those individuals. In Afghanistan, there were a lot of challenges. Challenges related to Afghanistan itself, infrastructure, security, basic supply of getting food in, or technology in. How does your computer work? But we can adapt to those. Having a government that supported the mission helped, but there were issues that still existed. We don't have an extradition treaty with Afghanistan. So you may have a case that is an indicted target, but how do you get that indicted target out of Afghanistan, where they know if they don't leave, nothing is going to happen to them, and they operate with impunity. But those challenges are met by creativity, by coming up with different solutions and to how do we get this person to travel? How do we get them to leave the country to a friendly country that will extradite them to the United States? So those challenges also presented opportunities to think outside the box. I was there when the helicopter crash happened. It was a dark day, for sure. Mike Marsack, our regional director, called everyone in the morning into the office and explained not only what had happened, but that you're not allowed to call anyone. And knowing that what the families of the 3 agents and the 7 military members were going through is difficult. And knowing they need to be notified first before you can notify your family that you were not the one in the helicopter crash was very difficult. However, probably my darkest day in Afghanistan, I got a phone call that my mother was going to pass away and that I had about 24 hours to get back home. And I woke up to all these phone calls, you need to come back today. I went and told my supervisor. He said, book your ticket, we'll take care of the rest. And the second problem arose. I did not have a passport because it was getting a visa at the embassy. And DEA, in typical fashion, found a solution. And I flew by DEA Air Wing down to Kandahar and was put on a military transport plane to Dubai. And they held that flight for me for 3 hours. And all of the military members who have missed the death of their family members, the birth of their children, it meant a lot to me. And I was able to make it home about 4 hours before my mom passed away. And I will be forever thankful to DEA for making sure that I got to say goodbye to my mother before she passed away.
I was at the academy when, Zach Tarantino was one of the class counselors for my academy class. I had, the terrorist attacks that happened September 11th affected us all. I knew I wanted to do something else. I finally made it to DEA in 2004, and then when Zach Tarantino, who was one of the counselors, he left to go to FAST. And then I didn't think much of it. And then I went out and started my DEA career in Eagle Pass, Texas. In around 3 years, the announcement came out for the FAIC, the Fast Assessment and Indoctrination course. So I only had 3 years in DEA, which is relatively young, but I talked to the senior agent. I was like, hey, this sounds really interesting, and it's something I really want to do, and it's something I feel I need to do. And so I went to the tryout, or the assessment. I did well enough in the assessment and got picked up, and so in August of 2008, I PCS'd at the beginning of the month, and then ordered a bunch of stuff online and went to Afghanistan 3 or 4 weeks later. And so my first fast rotation through Afghanistan was with Alpha Team. Carson Ulrich was the group supervisor, and that was the last 4 months of 2008. So then we cycled back home, and we did a couple of quick trips to Honduras at that time, and then we had our regular rotation back in 2009. So in 2009, they expanded the mid deployment. They expanded from 3 teams to 5 teams, and that's when Pat McDarby became a group supervisor. And Pat was the senior agent when I was there in 2008, and he took me under his wing. And so in 2009, when he got promoted, he's like, do you want to come to Echo Team? And I'm like, absolutely. So we brought a couple people in from the States. We took some of the people that were on Alpha, and then that's how Echo was formed in country at that time. And then we did the 9 deployment. The night of the crash, I was on the other helicopter, and so that was yeah, as far as like life-changing events, for sure. Yeah, that was one of them.
Lowest moment?
Absolutely,
In your time?
absolutely. Yeah, that night was it. I was sitting. So we had the operation was an absolute success. Drugs, bomb-making materials. We found what we were looking for. We were doing what we were sent to Afghanistan to do, right? Which is target networks that are using narcotics to facilitate terrorist activities, right? That's what we were doing. The mission was an absolute success, and I had a habit. As soon as I got on the helicopter, I would take my helmet off, and I had a little hookup to my iPad, and I got it from one of the Navy SEALs. He had it on his rig, and I was like, dude, like, you gotta set me up, man. I just need some music. And he's like, all right. So he gave me one of his extra ones. And so anytime we left the mission, iPad would go on and listen to a little music, and I would rack out. And I was out. I was out. And then Dave King is nudging me, and I was like, man, dude, I just found asleep. I know this helicopter ride's gonna be long. The helicopter ride back to the base was gonna be close to an hour. I'm like, dude, like, and he's like, the bird's down, and I didn't really understand what that meant. And then he repeated it, and then I know it's a straight shot. Like, we're getting the helicopter, and it's going straight. And I feel the helicopter turn around, and then he says, sorry. And he says, prepare to triage. So my role on the team was I was our EMT, I was our medic. And so we circle back around, we land, we see the fire, massive. I run into Pat. Pat says, I can't find them. And then I don't know if it was one of the MARSOC guys or one of the ODA guys comes up. He's like, hey, you're the DEA medic, right? I'm like, yep, I am. And so he's like, all right, your guys are in there. So we had the 18 Delta with the ODA team. He was all banged up in the crash, but he was working on some patients. He was working on the American patients, and now I'm in this mud hut that we were using for a casualty collection point for the Afghans that our partner force that were injured. So we treated them, and then we started the exfil and get the injured out. So we got them out, and then one of them got forgotten, and so we had to call in another extract helicopter. And here I am thinking like this is going to be a really long night. I didn't know anything. I'm in the room, working on these Afghan counterparts, and I didn't know what was going on out there. So we get all the patients flown off the scene, and then we start the recovery efforts. And that was a pretty tough time. I remember we would take turns. The fire was so high, like our boots were like melting, and we would take turns, and then we would come off and go do something else. And meanwhile, there's still stuff going on around us. We got engaged again, and so it was a crazy night, and yeah, and I remember I was standing behind Dave, and we were looking to recover our fallen, and one of the guys in front of Dave says, "We just found this. We think it's your guys," and it was Chad's alpha patch, and handed it back to Dave, and then Dave handed it to me, and we knew we had found Chad. He was the last one we were looking for.
You kept
And
going
yeah.
back. That wasn't your last deployment.
No. As a matter of fact, we flew back into Dover. We went to all the services. We had a very frank conversation with the administrator, who was Miss Leonhardt, and she asked us, "What do you guys want to do?" And we want to go back, and we want to go back, and we went back. We went back after all the services were over. We went back and finished our tour in '09, and then Echo Team did a bunch of deployments down to Central South America, and then my last deployment with FAST was in 2013 back in Afghanistan. The greatest achievement, the relationships we built. We seized a bunch of drugs. We seized a bunch of bomb-making materials. But really the greatest thing, and DEA continues to do it, is build relationships, right? Collaborate for a united cause, for a united effort. And that was that, like, and so that, and then that circle came back around. So when I left the FAST program and PCS to Lima, Peru, like Special Forces guys would cycle down through there, and it was typically 7th Group guys. And I got to know a bunch of them in Afghanistan, and we'd see each other. And as a matter of fact, even before I got to Peru, I got hit up by one of the Green Berets. They're like, "Hey, this guy's down in Peru, like he's waiting for you to get there." And just seeing that, like, outside of Afghanistan, the relationships that we built, and that camaraderie, and that brotherhood. And I get to Peru, and there's guys that I know from Afghanistan, and it's so crazy, and it still exists, and it still exists. And then again, so like my biggest accomplishment wasn't anything I did; it was what we as DEA did. It was our team. Is what DEA does. Yeah, we seize drugs, we arrest people for sure, but we were there in a collaborative effort and doing our part. Essential, worthy, fundamental to our very existence, right? So the actors in Afghanistan, Taliban, parts of Al-Qaeda, they were using drugs to fund their terrorist activities. What we were doing there was it a special moment in time? Yes, the war on terror was happening. The U.S. had invaded Afghanistan. We were doing our part there, absolutely. But that exists today. That exists in every office, in every overseas posting. Like, the DEA work is so fundamental to protecting Americans. And it may happen in Raleigh, North Carolina, or it may happen in Kabul, Afghanistan, but fundamental, essential, and it's part of being a servant for the American people.